fix things with motor skills. Now, if they couldn't fix things, somehow it has invisible.
Well, they got plenty of
Couple of my friends were like,
probably young people walking in. That's not good.
I went, you didn't understand.
Yeah, that's good. All right, for you.
I said, you will have
Unless like Melissa is starting on 7-2.
This is for you, right?
Like teachers 45.
That's the way it should be.
But I'm thinking I don't want them to know what music. Right, but maybe we can do it and it's done with a song.
Thanks for getting the bagels, John. You're welcome.
Morning.
Good.
So far, I would say so. Yeah, it looks like a waste of money.
Oh, yeah. No. Slow. She works.
Morning.
Good morning. Why does the Chagall paintings all have horns?
Well, he's just capturing the convention in the general society. I'm sorry?
He doesn't help.
He doesn't help it, no. But I think this is sort of the mythic, and for him, the horns they have rays coming out of them. So he makes it, well, the Hebrew is both horns and rays. And so he's, I think, thinking of these as receptacles for some divine.
Okay.
I think he softens it, but nevertheless he continues that.
Because when I went to Ohio State or Miami, we had a day where you had orientation. And for the orientation, I got into this room with two girls who had never met a Jewish person, and they thought,
That's it. That's it. Good morning. How are you? I can say a word about it. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Nice to see everybody. Before we begin, I think it might be a good idea for us just to pause for a moment, think about the situation that's going on in the Middle East, and hope for peace before too long and some resolution of this situation. Also, I think that we can agree, whatever our views are on how to resolve this situation. There's a process underway, and I'm sure we have some disagreements about that. But I think we can agree on at least one thing, that we hope that the civilian casualties on both sides are as small as possible. May not be possible, but I think we recognize that even though there are bad guys in the world, that we are all, especially those who aren't perpetrators on both sides, children of God, which one can understand literally or figuratively. If you understand it figuratively, this means that each individual has uncompromising dignity as a human being and stature as a human being, and therefore we hope that those who are innocents in this region emerge with as few casualties as possible. So let's just pause for a moment and reflect on the situation and hope for the fewest possible deaths. Okay, thank you. I want to thank those who participated in the bagel aspect of this morning. First of all, Carol Marshall for sponsoring bagels. Thank you very much. And Doris Donnelly for sponsoring live streaming. Thank you so much. And for Joan Levy for picking up the bagels. I'm always impressed every single week at how well this works. So thanks so much for your participation in this. So let's continue now with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so last week we brought to a conclusion our discussion of creation as it manifests itself in many different ways in the Bible, which comes as a surprise, I think. We think that the creation of the world in chapter 1, and then continuing with another kind of creation story in 2 and 3, and then the story moves on, always moving forward and never moving backward, so to speak. But I think, as we saw, that a variety of authors reach back to that creation story for insight, for application, for new ways of understanding creation. And so there is a kind of a twofold movement in the Bible, starting with foundations, moving forward into the historical process, and inevitably circling back for reflection on the original foundations and what power and fertility they may have. And I think we can see that there is a lot to be said about the implications of that creation story, which is one of the things that we saw. We ended last week with the discussion of the uses of creation, ideas, and imagery in the book of Job, and especially the speech out of the whirlwind by God to Job, chapters 38 to 41. I had the thought during the week to bring sections of a spectacular essay on this subject by a former professor of mine, Mattatyahu Tzfat, who wrote an article in the middle 60s with the title, The Meaning of the Book of Job. And as I was rereading it and asking myself, what is it that I can bring for us to look at from this article, it seemed to me that not only does Tzfat have some very arresting conclusions, but he has arguments in support of them. And I'm going to tell you one of his conclusions, but I decided not to bring excerpts because his argument is complex. And I just didn't think we wanted to spend yet another day on something as complex as that. So I didn't bring it. If I'm overwhelmed by emails and phone calls from you that, no, don't not bring it, do bring it to us, even if we have to spend 2 months on it. We want to hear it. If I'm tired of getting all those calls and I don't pick up, just leave me a message. His basic argument is that the premise of the story, the reality of the notion of measure for measure, we reap what we sow. And therefore, according to the friends, since Job is suffering, he must have sinned. And if you think of his suffering as an aspect of the natural world, his body is suffering, his children, and so on, then that assumption relates the moral world to the natural world. What we do has an impact on who we are as natural beings. And Tzfat's view is that this is a premise that is radically challenged by God. And that therefore the world of Job does not have that idea, and therefore what happens to us has nothing to do with how we behave. And that therefore morality is not a matter of calculation. I better act morally because I don't want something problematic to happen to me in the natural world, sickness, death, war. Therefore, the whole notion of the connection between deed and consequence, which Tzfat argues is the idea that is argued against, frees up the moral world not to behave consequentially as a matter of calculation, but to be moral for its own sake. And in that sense, he thinks that the book of Job is the purest book in the Bible that takes an assumption that is characteristic of so much of the Bible. The whole Deuteronomic histories is based on that assumption. Why is it the Israelites, one generation after another generation, suffer? They must have done something wrong. Namely, they must have abused, not followed the commandments of God. And Tzfat's argument is therefore that God is not punishing us or rewarding us for our action. And therefore the monotheism of the book of Job is the purest in the Bible. So I think it's a magnificent argument which he details meticulously. It's a very dense piece, but it's eminently worth reading. I've read it several times over the years. If you're interested in it, I found it in the resources tab of the Cleveland Public Library. You can go in there and punch this in. Tzvat is spelled T-S-V-A-T, Tzvat, T-S-V-A-T, Mattatyahu Tzfat, the meaning of the book of Job. And if you would like to spend a little time on it, we definitely can. But I've decided not to spend more on it. We could have seen how his argument develops, but I've decided not to. So we are moving ahead now to our next topic, which is sibling rivalry. And I've passed this sheet out again, same as last week, but I don't count on your bringing the sheet in. I want to welcome also live streamers, which I regularly forget to do. We're very glad to have you with us. And if you would like a copy of this sheet, which lists 13 examples of sibling rivalry, and we're going to talk about that in a second, just call or email my assistant Cindy Wilson. Cindy Wilson, C. Wilson, letter C, Wilson, at ttti.org. She will forward one of these sheets to you. People regularly who are live streaming do ask for the materials that we pass out, and I try hard to get Cindy a copy of it. So let's just begin with a little discussion here on just thinking about the issue of sibling rivalry. What do you imagine some of the causes of that phenomenon to be? I'm certainly not interested, nor would it be fair to be interested in a single cause, but what are the factors that lead to sibling rivalry as you imagine it?
Parents liking one child more than the other child, competition.
Okay, that's two things. Parental favoritism and competition. Let's call the one vertical and the other horizontal. By vertical, I mean from the parents to the children. And the other horizontal, the children among themselves, okay? So there are two elements of the structure of sibling rivalry. There may be more. Other thoughts, Jackie?
Yeah, the perception of the child. It doesn't, that the child perceives that the other one is being favored, not necessarily.
Not necessarily what?
Necessarily favored, but it's the perception of the child or a person as they grow.
Very good, very good. Irrespective of what the parent's role might in fact be, the perception that one is being favored over another. Okay, Amy?
No two people are born into the same family. If you're the second child, you come into a family of three. If you're the first child, you come into a family where there are just two parents. So the point of view can't be the same, so there's a problem right there.
Okay. The constellation of elements of people is different for each child, and therefore the dynamic is going to be different. Right. I think I've mentioned to you one of my earliest memories. I must have been 3 because my first brother was born when I was 3. And I have this image of standing at the top of the stairs in our house and seeing my mother being brought up the stairs holding my brother. Now, just why is it that among my earliest memories, this stands out to me? So it must have been traumatic, maybe small t, I don't know how big the t is, but the constellation, my role in the family changed at that moment. Bill? Jealousy. Good, okay. Jealousy based on reality or imagined, the perception. Other thoughts, Ron?
It's a two-faced mirror. The loss of being the center of attention. It's an immediate loss.
Right, exactly.
And on the other hand, it's the perception that the younger of the children is always being held to a standard that is being occupied by the older children. So it's a two-faced mirror. You the older child feels as though he's no longer the cynosure, the middle. The younger child feels that he is being, or she,
Compared.
held to a standard that is unattainable.
Right, okay, so the loss of, let's just call it preeminence, the first child has the preeminence, the loss of that, as well as the younger child's sense that he or she is always being compared to the older ones. I have two younger brothers. When they went through school, they were regularly called Roger. And that couldn't have felt good to them. I remember, actually, it just occurs to me that I grew up in Temple-Emmanuel here in Cleveland, and at one's bar mitzvah, after you read the Torah portion, Haftorah portion, you gave your talk, the rabbi had you come forward and he talked to you just like this, intimately. And I remember when my younger brother, the middle brother of the three of us, had his bar mitzvah, and the rabbi was talking to him in the presence of the congregation, the rabbi called him Roger over and over again. And my brother, this is something about my brother, was wearing a tie clasp with his name on it. And as the rabbi was calling him Roger, he was going like this. So he was under that burden, but he also, in a certain way, rose above it with a sense of humor. But these are good examples. Russell?
Well, the oldest retains an economic priority, keeps the flock or the farm, or becomes the king.
Yep, very good, very good. You know, I'm going to be personal again about it. I've recently reworked my will. I have 3 children. Automatically, irrespective of capacity or interest, I name my oldest child as the executor. This solves a problem because who gets to be the executor on what criterion? And you don't want to impose a criterion on it because this can damage the relationship among the children. So you do something automatic, the oldest child, and that is a kind of a remnant or another example of just that idea. In the Bible, the oldest child gets double the portion, and so on. Very good. So there is a kind of preeminence structurally in some cultures for the oldest child. Other thoughts? Maida?
There's a difference in abilities that sometimes shows up and one is upset because I can't do what the other can.
Very good. So an inevitable difference in ability, in interest, and that kind of thing. My father ran a medical laboratory downtown in Cleveland for many years. I went there only to meet him, to have dinner, and go to a baseball game. My next brother, the one who's figuring prominently in this subject, was down there all the time because he was interested in science and became a physician. So in terms of the connection of my father to the 2 of his sons, there's a third one, my brother's interest and ability must have warmed my father to him in a way that he didn't warm to me. I'm not talking globally, I'm just talking about in terms of that interest of his, and that's where ability and interest can play a role in this dynamic. Other thoughts? Harry?
Excess familiarity. You know the other sibling too well.
Say that again, Harry.
I said, you know the other too well. You know him so well that you are aware of all of his faults, defects, and whatnot.
Who knows?
You should not be aware of in a stranger.
Who knows them too well?
Each other.
Each other?
Yes.
Each other. And therefore, I know my brothers better than anybody, at least before we went away to school. And what do you say?
He breeds contempt.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Okay, too well in a kind of negative sense. I know the flaws. Okay, very good, very good, very good. Yeah.
When I came home from the hospital with my son, walked in the door, my daughter, who was screaming, said, "Who's going to be his mother?"
Who's going to be his mother? Oh, that's rich. That is very rich. Yeah. You're mine alone. Who's going to be his? I love that. I love that. I love that. Candy?
I think it's nature, nurture, and the inability of us to be aware of how the two work together. I don't think anybody knows how the two work together. But it's a balancing act for mothers, and if you don't, an infant, two infants look so similar in so many ways, but if you're not aware of the difference in the identity, then you can't possibly form different people.
Yeah.
And then you get jealousy and comparisons and what comes from
Nice.
from assuming they're both the same.
Right.
When identities are very different.
Yeah.
Because of nature
And how they unfold.
and how they unfold.
Right. Yeah. I've always felt that one of the conditions for being a good parent is a good night's sleep.
Nobody tells you that, though.
Yeah, right. Very good. Okay, excellent. So we can see how complicated this situation is. And it's not accidental, therefore, that the first story out of Eden in the Bible is the story of this phenomenon of sibling rivalry. I know, Jim?
But it gets even more complicated than that, which currently you see, but if you look at the Joseph story, you've got all these brothers with different mothers, all living apparently in the same house.
Yeah.
And obviously someone's mother is going to have favoritism over them rather than their half-sibling.
Very good.
And now in today's world, you see in the Jewish news an announcement for an engagement, somebody has 8 grandparents. Now, mathematically that's impossible, but there it is.
There it is.
And I don't think growing up, the announcements had more than 4 grandparents. So it becomes very complicated if you can step back and picture a house with half-siblings, step-siblings, and it's quite common right now.
Absolutely. Blended families. Very, very true. Yeah. Which I think probably complicates matters exponentially. It's not just a matter of 2 or 3 or 4 more people in the house, but the interrelationships become all the more complex on different levels. Bill?
I think even earlier there seems to be a rivalry between the children of God, and that the angels are jealous of mankind.
Where do you see the jealousy?
Well, why is God created us first? Why is man so important? Why give this world to them?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
The fall of
Right. It's not clear that there are angels in Genesis 1, that's for sure. Let us make man in our image may suggest a divine counsel, but it's not clear. It could be the royal we. But you make a good and interesting point, at least, that in the chain of being, if we talk about that, there's a famous book by Arthur Lovejoy, The Great Chain of Being, eminently worth reading, where he talks about the increasing value, maybe that's the wrong way of saying, complexity, from an amoeba to an animal that crawls to an animal that walks, and so on and so on. And in that great chain of being of Genesis 1, human beings are at the top of that chain other than God, And that may lead to your suggestion that who might have been just above human beings in the divine economy, maybe it was his advisors, his angels, his messengers, and there may be that factor too. Certainly Milton takes advantage of that, doesn't he, in Paradise Lost? Okay, so what I want to do here is make a distinction, and then we're going to take a look at this list, between two ideas: sibling rivals and sibling rivalry. So there could be rivals. Rachel and Leah are rivals. But there doesn't seem to be, at least the Torah doesn't talk about, maybe I'm wrong about it, I didn't go back, but as I remember, there's no discussion of the actual process of their rivalry, okay? But being the children of two different mothers and one father, that's a situation destined to have some rivalry in it. It's rivalrous structurally without actually enacting in the story the rivalry itself. So let's take a look at this sheet. Depending on how much time we want to give to this, I think that this distinction flows in this sheet in the following way. I'm going to read the numbers of those pairs that are rivalries in process. And the others are just structured as a rivalry without our seeing it in action. I'm struggling to say this clearly. You get the point that I'm making? So here are the pairs, or Joseph and his brothers is more than pairs, but that are rivalries. 1, Cain and Abel. 4, Jacob and Esau. 6, Joseph and his brothers. 8, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. 12, Amnon and Tamar and Absalom, children of David. And 13, Solomon and Adoniah. There is where we see the rivalries in action. And therefore, those are the ones that we're going to look at. Noah's sons have different views of the father at a key moment, but we don't see them interacting with one another in a rivalrous way. Isaac and Ishmael, and by the way, I'm not 100% certain that I'm right in these particular items. I may have forgotten that Isaac and Ishmael actually do interact in a rivalrous way, and if you think that's true, we should note that. Rachel and Leah, certainly Jacob's favoring one over the other may have created some rivalrous phenomena, but I don't think we see them interacting. I might be wrong. Amy?
Well, Leah had to be in on the ruse. She had weak eyes.
Yes.
So she was already playing from a place of weakness.
Yeah.
And so it was purposeful. She wasn't sleepwalking when she married the guy. So I think that she was complicit.
Okay, very good. You're making an inference, and it's a plausible inference. Maybe we'll take a look at that at some point just to see. Onan, and Shelah in chapter 38 of Genesis, in terms of Tamar and her husbands, but I don't think they interact, but clearly the situation is set up for interaction. You see the distinction I'm making? Hannah and Peninnah, you remember that story? Even David and his brothers, there is a little bit of jealousy there, but not developed. In any event, we'll have our hands full with the numbers that I've indicated. Let me just review them quickly. 1, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, and 13. And of course, as always, I'll welcome your disagreement if you think, as Amy just has, offering a thought that Rachel and Leah really do have a kind of rivalry. I want to just continue by reading a couple of paragraphs from this really wonderful book written by Leon Kass, K-A-S-S, with the title The Beginning of Wisdom, Reading Genesis. Genesis itself may be 30 pages. This discussion of Genesis is almost 700 pages. So, but it's really quite a wonderful book. Cass himself is an interesting figure. He's got a PhD in chemistry. He's a physician, and he also teaches humanities at the University of Chicago. One of those guys that, how did they do it? Anyway, let me read from this book, beginning with chapter 4, Fratricide. The title is Fratricide, Brothers Killing Brothers, and Founding, with a colon, subtitle, The Twisted Roots of Civilization. And here's what Cass has to say about it. The so-called second creation story, told in Genesis chapters 2 and 3, Garden of Eden, and discussed in our last two chapters, does not end with man's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. On the contrary, the tale of primordial man and woman continues and concludes in the next chapter of Genesis, which narrates their earthly doings and those of their children. Okay? So for Cass, the first basic unit, the primordial history, is chapters 1 through 4. Creation of the world, chapter 1, Garden of Eden, 2, 3, Cain and Abel, chapter 4. The story of Cain and Abel, the main subject of Genesis 4, not only completes the story of Adam and Eve, of whom we shall not hear again, by presenting an account of primordial life outside the garden. In that sense, it's a new beginning. Let's think of the garden as a kind of timeless arena, and history begins. Historical time begins with Adam and Eve. So now with chapter 4, we're outside or beyond mythic history. I don't know if I love the word mythic, but something like that. And into historical time, what we might call quotidian time, clock time. So I'm going to go back again. The story of Cain and Abel, the main subject of Genesis 4, not only completes the story of Adam and Eve, of whom we shall not hear again, by presenting an account of primordial life outside the garden, the life of human beings born of woman, living under their own internal, natural knowledge of good and bad, untutored yet, natural knowledge, intuition, instinct, whatever. It also shows the reader what unregulated human life is really like. Eager for such understanding, we willingly join with Adam and Eve in turning our backs on the Garden of Eden. We gladly follow them as they enter upon earthly life as compared with life in Eden, in expectation of learning more about the nature of our humanity. As part of its convincing portrait of real life, this final episode of the primordial story introduces and weaves together many fundamental elements of human existence, psychic and social. Discovering the character of these elements is, as before, our primary goal, more important than the story itself. You can see his point here. The story itself is rendered as the episode in a particular time frame. And once we go beyond that time frame, we are beyond the story. Whereas if you look at the story in terms of its general ideas as founding the human condition, then once we get past that story, we're not past those ideas which continue to have their way in and with us. I think that's what he's saying. Discovering the character of these elements is, as before, our primary goal, more important than the story itself. Present for examination are the following, and now he's going to list elements of chapter 4. The household and family, that's the context. The first human institution, which I think is a very interesting idea, isn't it? The family is the beginning of society. So if we want to talk about how society unfolds, let's look at its foundation, the family. So the author here, the editor, the author, is not merely bringing yet another story to generate the process, but the story of our terrestrial existence. Maimonides himself says in the guide that the family is the first part of the city. We learn how to be citizens, for example, in the family. Number one, I'm going back. The household and family, the first human institution, hence the first element of society, featuring the equally elementary yet very different relationships between parents and children, the vertical, and between brother and brother, the horizontal. He could have said sister and sister. I could have complicated, right. Number two, distinctive human passions related to sociality, being social. Preeminently, and here are what he considers to be the distinctive human passions, those passions which manifest themselves right away in this founding story: wounded pride, anger, jealousy, fear, and dread. If Cass is right about this, think of all of those primal passions that are at work here in this story of founding. 3, the third element of this story, violent death, crime and punishment, right? Violent death, Cain is punished, crime and punishment, and the rudiments of natural justice. Natural justice is going to be juxtaposed by Cass to revealed justice. So every time we have natural justice, this is Cass, in the Bible, it is implicitly compared to something that is going to be coming, and that is Mount Sinai. On the assumption that natural justice is not sufficient, our instincts, our intuitions, our natural relationships do not provide sufficient material for a just society. Because human passions, wounded pride, anger, jealousy, fear, and dread, are likely to continue to overwhelm us, and revealed justice is an attempt, among other things, to curb, redirect, soften those natural, let's call them hot passions. That's what we're going to see here, according to Cass. So we also have, just to repeat number 3, the third element, violent death, crime and punishment, and the rudiments of natural justice. 4, the emergence of agriculture and settlements, the arts and the city. That comes a little bit later. But all of that are contained in chapter 4. Number 5, the first attempts through sacrifices, Cain and Abel both sacrifice, at a relationship between human beings and God. Rudimentary religion. Which think about it. Cain and Abel sacrificed without being told to do so. And therefore, it's the idea here that religion is part of the natural inclination of human beings, who, left to ourselves, would engage in some form of religious activity. That's the idea in Genesis, in this story. It's a stunning one, isn't it? Because the Torah is filled with laws, rules, here's how you should do it. And suggesting that if somebody didn't tell us what to do, we might not do anything like it. But Genesis chapter 4 thinks of this as part of the natural inclination of human beings. So, and Cass continues, as a result, this tale manages to introduce in a mere 26 verses many of the essential elements of human nature, showing us ourselves in a mirror and making vivid how humankind would live on its own without moral instruction or law. See his point? That this story, I'm going to overstate it, has Sinai in mind already. Exposing the limitations of human beings without instruction, it points to the need for instruction. This is not Rousseau's view of human nature, innocent, poisoned by society. It's much more a Freudian view, isn't it? That there are these instincts and impulses from the very beginning. Precisely because its significance, this story, is more anthropological than historical, more about what it means to be human than a moment in history. Precisely because its significance is more anthropological than historical. To repeat, Cass says, these are paradigmatic. These are paradigms more than they are real people. That's an interesting point, isn't it? People ask all the time, I mean, were there Cain and Abel? Was there Noah? Was there Adam and Eve? And Cass's answer is, that's the wrong question. The right question is, what are these stories trying to tell us about the nature of things as paradigms delivered by stories? The form of exposition is narrative, but we think of narrative as placed in the temporal continuum. A story takes place sometime. When did this story take place? At the beginning. Did it really? Was there really this story? That's the wrong question, according to Cass. This is telling us about human nature. I think a very interesting point. I'm going to go back. Precisely because its significance is more anthropological. Think of anthropology as the doctrine of what it means to be human, and not so much a department of studies in the university different from sociology and psychology and so on. Precisely because its significance is more anthropological and historical. To repeat, these are paradigmatic more than they are real people. The story helps us see clearly some of the reasons why the natural or uninstructed way doesn't work, and therefore the subsequent giving of God's law might be both necessary and welcome. To read the text in this wisdom-seeking spirit, we need to set aside certain moral prejudices that will distort our understanding of the text. This, I admit, is difficult to do, especially since some of these thoroughly decent moral opinions are derived ultimately from biblical religion itself. But the characters in the story before us do not themselves live under the biblical teachings. They have received no moral instruction. They know no imposed law, human or divine. Unlike us, they have not read the story of Cain and Abel or anything else in the Bible. Indeed, it is precisely the moral poverty of their untutored wants and ways that constitutes the value of the Bible's early stories for our moral education. And that's Cass's main point about the book of Exodus. It's an instrument for our moral education. Thus, if we come at the Cain and Abel story with the high-minded notions about the goodness of justice or offering sacrifice or founding cities, we will read only to have our moral prejudices confirmed without any deeper understanding of brotherhood, for example. The story of Cain and Abel is quite obviously a story about brothers and brotherhood. As the first such story, it promises, on our hypothesis that first stories are paradigms, to reveal the basic pattern of and the unvarnished truth about the natural relationship between brothers. Yet because the picture of brotherliness it paints in this story is so dark, and the fratricidal deed of Cain so horrible, readers recoil from considering the possibility that enmity, yes, enmity to the point of fratricide, might be the natural condition of brothers. And notice in our earlier discussion, drawing out all the kinds of causes, we must have put 15 or 20 possible causes on the so-called board, I think vindicates Cass's point. Look at all the tensions, all the possible problems inherent in the connections between brother and parents and brother, sister and sister, and parents and so on. So that seems to give some power to Cass's point. So let me read a sentence again. It's a long one. Yet because the picture of brotherliness it paints is so dark, and the fratricidal deed of Cain so horrible, readers recoil from considering the possibility that enmity, yes, enmity to the point of fratricide, might be the natural condition of brothers. Rather than read philosophically, readers condemn moralistically. It's a nice point. We bring our moral sensibilities to this situation. How horrible is that? Thank God I don't have any of those feelings toward my brother. Whereas Cass is saying, yes, we ought to read it philosophically in the sense that we ought to glean from this the ideas, the paradigm, and assess it as a true reflection of all the things that we brought out in our earlier discussion. Rather than see Cain as the human pattern, some readers treat him as an anomaly and denounce him as evil. To be sure, Cain's deed is evil, as even he comes to see. But in order really to learn from the text, we must postpone this judgment until we see what it might be about the human soul that makes fratricide an ever-present possibility. Don't you love this? I know I do. And Cass is really great. He goes on too long in a lot of ways. 700 pages, really. But much of it is really great. Harry?
You know, the very point of asking about sibling rivalry assumes that there is rivalry to begin with.
Yeah.
It does not describe sibling amiability. There must have been some. In the same way, a lot of the other horrible deeds of human beings are described, but the opposite is not. The concordance between individuals or the individuals and God. Why is that? Is that because it would not teach us?
Is that because of what?
Why is that? Is it because it would not teach us a lesson?
I think that's a wonderful comment. So I'm being asked to repeat the question. So Harry's question really is, Harry, tell me if this is faithful to what you've said, that what we seem to be looking at so far is that the relationship among siblings is deeply, extensively problematic. That it really is about the problems among siblings. What about the converse? What about amiability? What about friendship? What about good feelings? I have two things to say about that, I think. One is good corrective. And important to say that. Though the second comment is, I wonder whether the amiability is achieved rather than natural. Whether or not brothers and sisters come to recognize the importance of friendship, of amiability, against some of their darker impulses, and therefore come to it. As I hear myself saying this, I know it's overstated, because I don't want to deny your first point. Why might it not be as natural as hostility? We certainly pointed out together all the ways in which this is a deeply problematic relationship in so many ways it can go wrong, that we might think that it's only going to go wrong and not also go right equally naturally. That's your point. I sometimes think that the role of law is to tame our negative impulses, and that we can only work together in society, whether it's a family or something larger, if we get direction from outside. Convention, social norms, law, family patterns. So you raise a really important point. I'm going to be autobiographical again. Some of you know that my younger brother and I meet a couple of times a year and spend 2-3 days together. We do it right halfway between our two homes. He lives in New Jersey, so we go to Penn State University and hang out and talk. And we've done it since 2005 when our second parent died, thinking that if we're going to keep our relationship together, we have to work at it now. The magnet is gone. Early on, my brother expressed a tremendous amount of animosity toward me. To his great credit, he was willing to do this, feeling just what we've been talking about a little bit, that our parents favored me, and so on and so on. And over time, we got to those things. I'm not trying to say we fully resolved them, but we're able to cultivate the positive aspects of a relationship. Harry, you might say that the only way we could have done this from the start is to accept our love for one another, a positive. Otherwise, we might not have been able to work through the negative. So this is an illustration of your point, I think. So that's very, very, very good. And of course, throughout history, different thinkers have, Freud feels the negativities at the very start. Rousseau, the positive ones. To the degree that you're a utopian in thinking, you might think that the situation is fundamentally benign. And if you're not, you have to pay attention to those malignant aspects. So that's a warning to us, not to overemphasize. Russell?
So I just wanted to throw out, maybe to add another sibling set. In some aspects, Adam and Eve were siblings. So when we go to the point where, with the apple, Adam says, and he says, why did you do this?
Yes.
It's two kids blaming the other kid.
Yeah.
He says, the woman you put at my side. Which is like, I didn't want to, She gave me the apples. She made me eat it. So in some ways, there's a lot of, and the Father is God who put both of those siblings together, and then something bad happened, and they start blaming each other.
So that's interesting. So you're saying there are more causal factors in a way than we might have reckoned with. It's also the relationship between the parents that may have an impact on the constellation of the family. And there's also God, who's, and one can think of God in terms of actual activity, or something a little more metaphorically as representing the nature of things. And the nature of things may conspire against us. Just the privations, for example, of enough food, and so on. Am I right about what you're saying, that there are different factors than we've reckoned with?
I'm saying there's a family structure between God and Adam and Eve as the children of God, and then there's some civil, and one blaming the other. Then the other thing is that, and they said, Cain and Abel grew up in the family of Adam and Eve, and they said, boy, before you were born, we lived over in the Eden neighborhood. Now we're here. I got to work the land, and better be careful of that guy. And so maybe the inclination to sacrifice not comes from an innate need for religion, but just to protect yourself from the bad guys.
And which is one of the roles of religion, we might say. So you're pointing to the larger context, which can also have an impact on these particular relationships, to which I want to ask rhetorically, how the heck do we survive? All of these factors that impinge upon us. I mean, to have decent, productive, amicable relationships and lives is an achievement. Because there are a lot of things that we haven't even talked about, nor should we here. The fear of death. Not only death, but the fear of death, which shadows us, a recognition of our mortality and the paucity of time that is available to us. There's so many things in the environment, social and natural, that conspire against us, I might say. Bill?
To me, it goes back to the centrality of that story of the apple and the fall of man. Because prior to that, there was no knowledge of good and evil, they just were, so they had a natural morality. Afterwards, we're conflicted. We have conflicting impulses.
Right.
And it seems that Mount Sinai is a course correction, a gift, in a similar way that Christianity, Jesus, is the same thing, is salvation.
Right.
And it all goes back to that early fall, where we first begin to recognize different impulses, conflicting impulses. Doesn't mean we're all bad or that we're by nature evil. We are always both, but one can predominate depending upon circumstances and our abilities and our understanding. That seems to be the real central story of all of these.
Right. Good. Well, so the Bible is, we've said this over and over again, deeply realistic. I mean, unflinchingly realistic here. It doesn't start with a great, the story is great in some ways, our endowment, our possibilities, and so on. I think back to Harry's point, there's both the positive and the negative that are brought out in these stories. Ron?
It seems to me that we learn from the tales that feature deviation from normality. There's a deviant act, and we take that act and discuss it and learn about it so as to understand its deviation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole pattern here. Everything that we learn from the Torah, other than the revealed laws, are examinations of things that are not good, that are not the norm in society. We don't have stories of normative behavior.
Well, we do actually. I mean, I think to Harry's point, Abraham's hospitality to the visitors is a good example of felicity, isn't it?
Okay.
And there must be several others. When Moses defends the people against God, that's leadership as pro-people and not just again. So, but I think your point nevertheless is intriguing, that these actions are seen as deviation. I'm quarreling a little bit with the how that sentence concludes, from the norm. What is the norm? Is the norm natural goodness from which the deviations deviate?
I think the norm is that which benefits the society as a whole.
Well, look, in an environment where there is a scarcity of resources, that's part of the issue, isn't there? I mean, why was my brother jealous of me? Why did he think my parents favored me? His view was, my parents had a finite amount of affection, and they poured much of it on me and too little on him. And that's the way things are. There's not enough to go around of a lot of things. Yeah. It's not just the deviation from the norm, it seems to me, whatever that norm is, but also the norm itself. I think that's what Cass is pointing to. What is the situation itself before human beings are placed in it? Scott?
Yeah, exactly what I wanted to talk about. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior is an innate trait of the person acting. He mentions anthropology. From an anthropological point of view, there were, as Ron said, some norms. Those norms may have been negative, they may have been positive, but there were some unwritten rules in place. Here's how society behaves. Here's how this culture behaves. Deviation may have been a good deviation or a bad deviation, depending on I guess, morality, but the morality is not necessarily defined, I guess, until, his assertion is that it's cyanide, right?
But you're suggesting, Scott, if I understand you, that there is a kind of natural morality as well.
There may be, that's the difficult thing to identify, though. Is it a negative inclination, or is it a positive inclination, or is it some balance of both?
There's a good example of positive natural morality, I think, in the first chapter of Plato's Republic, which is a discussion about justice. And there are three ideas offered there. And the second one, by a guy named Polemarchus, is help your friends and hurt your enemies. That would seem to be as basic as we might not like it, but we do have a kind of innate loyalty to our own. So that may be, and that's a good thing. Eventually, that argument runs aground, and the final notion is help everybody, don't harm anybody. But there is this natural proclivity to favor our own. So that may be a positive natural capacity.
Yeah, that kind of goes to what, I think I have the right book, that Jonathan Sacks' book, Not in God's Name, doesn't it lean toward that idea that there is a preference for our own, and ultimately, you brought up shortage of resources, self-preservation.
Well, there's also that.
Expands outward.
Yeah. Yeah, E.E. Cummings says somewhere, we are the whole ball of wax to ourselves. Or he says also, a lovely idea, that I've never seen a peripherally situated ego. We're all egocentric, and that there is that. Stuart, you had a comment?
Yeah. First of all, the things you list here, the relationships you list, all have to do with men, males, or with regard to females, their relationship to men.
Mm-hmm.
And secondarily, the Bible, as Greek mythology, as all mythologies, all contain stories of basically failure of sibling relationships.
Yeah. So Stuart, I think you're making 2 points, that the Bible's consideration of this topic is largely male-oriented, male-centered, although remember the story of Ruth, which is all women and maybe one of the greatest relationships in the Bible. It's not just one of them. Think of what Ruth does and what Naomi does. If you think about the end of the Song of Moses, Miriam and her cohort take their timbrels, and so that seems to be a moment of female celebration. The story of Dinah, that's a tragic story, but I think it's true. It's mostly, it's patriarchal. We've talked about this over the years many, many times. And then you point out that in Greek mythology we also have this same kind of thing. Right, even though Orestes and what's her name, Electra, worked together to murder Clytemnestra, it's a pleasant story, but at least they're working together. Okay, so let's turn now to chapter 4, and let's see what we can make of this story. So, okay, I'm just looking at how far should I go here. So let me read it through verse 12, and then we'll talk about our topic. So now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gained a male child with the help of the Lord. Okay. So I want to say something about that verse before going on. With the help of the Lord is not in the text. The text really reads, I have gained or purchased or even made a man et Adonai. That's all it is. Et is often just a sign of a direct object, but it also can be translated with. So one plausible translation is, I have made a man along with the Lord. So with the help of the Lord introduces a theological idea that is not inherent in the text, that she recognizes she couldn't have done it without God. Okay? If you translate it in one of its literal ways, she is putting herself on a par with God. I, like God, have created or made a man. Okay? And I think to the degree that is a plausible translation, I think it is, it introduces a very important element in our discussion. So let me continue reading, we'll come back to it. She then bore his brother Abel. Abel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil, and Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings of his flock. The Lord paid heed to Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offering he paid no heed. Cain was much distressed, and his face fell. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you distressed? Why is your face fallen? Surely if you do right, there is uplift. And scholars from time eternal have tried to figure out exactly what's going on here. The language is problematic. But there is uplift may capture something important here. Let's go back. Why are you distressed and why is your face fallen? Surely if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master. Cain said to his brother Abel, then there's something of an omission here. Doesn't say what he says. The Midrash tries to fill it in. And when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. The Lord said to Cain, where's your brother Abel? And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Then he said, what have you done? Hark, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Therefore you shall be more cursed than the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. If you till the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. Since you have banished me this day from the soil, and I must avoid your presence and become a restless wanderer on the earth, anyone who meets me may kill me. The Lord said to him, I promise, if anyone kills Cain, sevenfold vengeance shall be taken on him. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who meet him should kill him. Okay? So we sometimes misunderstand that mark of Cain, not so much as a mark of opprobrium, but as a warning to others. Cain left the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Sibling rivalry. What do we see here? What do we think we should divide this into our two parts. What are the causes and what are the phenomena of the rivalry itself? So what do we see here? Maida?
Well, it's interesting to me that it's because God didn't give him the same blessing as his brother. Not with his parents, but that God did.
Yes.
And therefore, instead of rivaling against God, he's taking it out on his brother.
Okay, very good, very good. How can we integrate your comment into our discussion of the causes of sibling rivalry? I mean, I think we can think concretely or we can think more broadly about this. I mean, do you have some thoughts about it?
I think that somehow that this greater presence by the name of God in this case is more powerful than his parents, because we don't know what the parents did and how they said, oh, you did such a good job tilling the soil. But the fact that somehow Abel got more from this overall power was determined in this particular.
I like your use of two phrases, overall power and overall presence, which strikes me as a way of qualifying an exclusive focus on God.
Right.
So what you seem to be pointing to is, without denying that God is involved here, could it be that God here might also represent, now I'm being Cassian, that God here metaphorically represents forces beyond our control? And what might they be?
And the fact that Cain is responding to this unknown, they don't know who God is, but that this unknown force above him or around him is making him feel less important than his brother.
Yeah.
His way of responding to it was very, very overly.
I'm just wondering, doesn't the differences in our natural endowments come back to haunt us in some ways?
Yes.
I mean, James Madison was like 5'6". Other than that, I think no president was shorter than 5'11". Height. About Absalom, it says that he was a head taller than anybody else. Natural endowment as leading either to being favored or to being disfavored. Third graders go out onto the playground and somebody says, let's play softball. And a part of those kids can do it very well, and another part, which don't have athletic ability, this doesn't have anything to do with their character, they just aren't going to thrive in that situation. What did they do to deserve that?
And it impacts them for many years.
So, this story, this part can be taken literally. And it's unfair when it's God. Why did God favor? But if you think it more metaphorically, as the differences of the circumstances in which we find ourselves, now it's real. So that may be one thing here that life didn't favor Abel in some ways, and may have made him upset, jealous of his brother, resentful of his parents. Jim?
Well, it also brings in the attribute we have of passion, because his passion overtook the naivete of this moment in time of this horrible action has rendered all kinds of future problems, mostly upon himself.
Yeah.
Because his brother's gone, that's over with. But sometimes, well, we all do stuff without thinking. It's a reaction. And that few seconds of reaction causes decades of problems.
Right, consequences.
And it's all related to the fact that we all have, to one degree or another, our attribute of passion is there. You can't get rid of it, it's just there.
Yeah, the hot passions. Ellen?
Why do you think God favored one offering over the other?
Well, there's a little evidence in the text, isn't there? Right? That in verse 4, back to 3. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil, and Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings. So, I don't know if that has anything to do with sibling rivalry, but Cain is just picking something out of the ground or whatever, and Abel is asking himself, which becomes normative later. We give the first of the flock, an unblemished lamb, and so on. Not the things that we don't need, but the things that we do need to give to God. Jackie?
Yeah, that was the same question Allie asked a couple of years ago. And I think the answer was when you pull something from the ground and you give the offering, you can use the same ground to grow the same thing over again. But when you get the choicest animal, it cannot be, you can't give it again. And you're giving something that is very dear to you, not something that you have grown and there are many others.
So you really, that's a very good comment, really. You're making 2 points here. One, he gives the best of what he gives, but also what he gives is a greater gift than what Cain gives. Cain gives from the fruit of the soil, which you can replant. Whereas if you give an animal up, that animal is not going to be able to sire more animals. So it's not only the quality of what he gave, but the essence of what he gave. So according to Jackie, I really never thought of that. According to Jackie, Abel really stars here in the way that Cain does not. I wonder if that has anything to do with, maybe this is just another example. The Torah doesn't tell us about Cain and Abel in the 3rd grade, and in the 4th grade, and the 5th grade. This is the 6th grade. And by that time, if Abel has acted true to form, he's not only given the best of what he gives the best kind of thing. And Cain is fed up. Joan?
Cain didn't have the same choice. I mean, the things that were available for him to give as a sacrifice were not as important.
Very good. Excellent. So Cain was destined to have only the fruits of the soil, whereas Abel, and therefore the circumstances in which Cain finds himself are already against him, which I think, as we pointed out, is a factor in this dynamic here, the different circumstances. Just want to be, yeah.
But if they both gave the same amount of goodness of their heart, even though the gifts were different, and God showed favor to one, I mean, you can see that that's going to cause a lot of problems. And is that fair?
What makes us think that it's going to be fair? Yeah. This is back to Tzvat's point in the story about, in the article about Job. I mean, why do we fair means that the consequences should be commensurate with the action. And if they both gave from their hearts, is it fair? That's that logic of you reap what you sow. Tzvat's point is, what makes us think that that principle of justice is the way the world works? It's just a convention for us. I want to be sure, Nada.
How do we know, be quiet, how do we know what God did to, how do we know what God did that gave Abel the sense that God was happy with him and not to Cain? It doesn't indicate how they were given this awareness that God was pleased with them or not pleased with them. Don't you think we need to have some understanding of what God's point was, or what God's behavior was to these people that might have caused it?
Sure.
No.
Well, that's true about so much of the Bible that it doesn't give us background. But on the other hand, the facts are pretty clear. Abel is favored, Cain is not. This could be a younger son. That could be another factor, birth order, where Abel is favored. There is another factor here that I don't know what to do with, and that is in verse 1, when we looked at the language here, I have gained a male child with the help of the Lord, which suggests that she has pride in giving birth. But it's more than that. The pride in the one who opens the womb. This factor would seem to suggest favoring Cain and not Abel. That's why I'm having a little trouble with this, about trying to integrate this into it. Amy?
Well, if you think about it, and, I was raised in a family of 4 kids, that the first one who does it in a pure way. Nobody told him to do it, he just did it.
Yeah.
Abel's sort of motivations could be much more suspect. I'm going to one-up him. I want to be noticed too. And God favoring Abel's kind of saying, well, you're out of the Garden of Eden now. It's not quid pro quo. Sometimes stuff isn't fair. And this is the way the world's going to work.
But you're also suggesting, if I hear you correctly, that Abel has another kind of motivation. He wants to outdo the firstborn, which may have structural implications, that younger children have a kind of natural animus, maybe that's too strong a word, against the others because the older ones are favored. So that could also impact the nature of things. Russell? Yep.
I think there's some unique differences between Cain and Abel, because either Abel learned from his parents to give the best to God, and Cain ignored it, or there was some either insight or generosity of soul that had him do that. Because in the garden, you can tell what's a really good peach or what's a really good tomato. You can pick the best of your harvesting about. So it's not just shafts of wheat that all look the same. So that Cain did have choices as well.
Hey, Cain had
choices of what he the fruits of the earth, what he could give to God.
Okay, so you're suggesting that what Cain did was not just innocent, because he could have chosen the best of what he had. And does that have implications for this dynamic?
Just for it just shows that maybe Cain was more self-centered, or he didn't learn the lessons from his parents the way Abel did. So that there were some issues with his either upbringing or orientation or genetics.
So his role in the family, aside from who he was, may have had an impact on this birth order. Harry?
It seems to me it's all irrelevant. What whole thing is to form a lesson that it is sinful for a person to kill his sibling,
Yeah,
regardless of what
right.
the cause may have been.
Right. But, that's a sinful action, and by definition, a sinful action should not be done. That's the lesson to us. But it seems to me another, maybe deeper question is, well, why is it done? Yeah, we can label it as sinful, but why do we have the intention to do it in the first place?
In preparation, as you said before, for Mount Sinai, much later, where it says, thou shalt not kill.
Right. But why does it need to say that? And by the way, it's thou shalt not murder.
Murder, right.
Yeah. So why does it need to say that? There's no commandment. I challenge you to look into the 5 books of Moses and find the following commandment. Take a breath every 15 seconds. I don't need to be told that. I'm doing it automatically. A mitzvah, a do or a don't, is rendered over and against an inclination to do the opposite. Otherwise, we don't need it. Don't park on the left side of the street. Why do I need to be told that on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Because I see on that side of the street a space, and I'm going after it. So, it's true that this story may be a kind of preparation for the need for law. But the basic question is, what is the need for law? We're dealing here with human nature here, which according to Cass's view is a part of human nature that we're seeing. The story of Cain and Abel isn't in the book of Judges. It's not just in the book of Genesis. It's at the beginning. It's the first. It's stunning to think that the first act outside the Garden of Eden, the founding act of history, the axiom, the presupposition of the historical process is murder. And not only the murder of your neighbor, the murder of your brother. That's pretty darn stunning, isn't it? That's a very, it may be right, this whole kind of thing is preparation, the need for Sinai. But strikes me that the authors here need not be held responsible for what comes later. I want to be sure that, yeah. Ron, and then, yeah.
Is there any indication anywhere behind Cain's action, of the genesis of Cain's action? I mean, did he just wake up one morning and say, yeah, I think I'm going to murder my brother?
What do you think?
Well, from what I can read here, that's as good an explanation as any.
No, there's no causal factor explicit.
There's no causal factor indicated here. We posit that there was something in the Lord's speaking to Cain in this somewhat mystic passage, where it appears that Cain has already been perverse or is leaning towards perversity. We don't know what that is, there's no indication. But if we posit that pre-existed, still, there's no explanation as to why it happened. And there's no indication here other than the oblated passage, the omission marks, which this translator says the meaning of maybe it's come, let's go to the field, rather than Cain said to his brother something. Other than there could have been a violent argument in those omission marks.
Yeah.
And in the violence of the moment, Cain whacked in. But we don't know. There's
Yeah.
nothing to suggest a reason.
I'll offer one by way of speculation. And I'll begin by saying something autobiographical again. Along the way, my brother once said to me, you know, you get away with stuff, and you got away with stuff when you were growing up that I didn't get away with. Why? To the degree that he was right, why? I opened the womb. And therefore, I was favored inadvertently. And I felt that, therefore, I can get away with stuff. And Cain, having been favored in this way, thinks he can get away with stuff. And so he dares to put Abel out of the way. The consequences of parental favoritism based on birth order. How about that? What's the role of Eve's bragging that she did something as consequential as what God did?
Where is the immediate trigger?
Where's the what?
The immediate trigger.
Well, the immediate trigger may just be what somebody maybe may have said, that Abel's offering was, Cain is ready to pounce. And all he needs is an occasion to do it. And he sees that Abel's offering is accepted. And there may be a good reason for it. Maybe he offered the best of his flock and so on. But that seems to him an injustice, especially over and against his birth order priority. And he strikes out. I mean, the speculation does take advantage, I think, of the structure of the family. It's speculation, but we might ask the question, why does Cain do what he does? And that's an attempt to do it. Also, trying to draw out the dynamics of things. I wouldn't like to graph this discussion. I mean, how would we order it? Stuart, then I think we need to stop.
It's not murder. It's killing. Any third grader will tell you that when somebody dies, he gets right up.
He gets what?
He gets right up. And fights another fight, fights another day.
I'm not following you.
Any third grader will tell you
Yes?
that when somebody dies,
Yes?
he gets right up and
Continues.
continues.
He does? A person who dies? I'm not following that.
An actor,
Oh, in a story.
yes.
But this story purports to not conflict with the basic laws of nature, one of which is dead is dead.
But he doesn't know that.
Well, he may not know that. Okay. So, I think we've got to have one more question. Jackie.
I don't, looking at this, I don't think it's our job to question what happened between the two brothers.
Really?
Yeah, let the hi-hats do that. I think the lesson is that if you do something bad,
Yes.
you're going to be punished.
Okay.
Pride and punishment.
At least you deserve to be.
Yes, but I think to discuss what happened. Wait, how can we discuss?
Look, but I think this is a deceptively complicated story. But I think our issue here is the dynamics of the family, especially in terms of sibling rivalry. The question of crime and punishment is a part of the story, but that's the aftermath, we might say, of the dynamic. So I think it's relevant to a broader understanding of the story, but I'm not sure it's that germane to our more narrower topic. Am I wrong about this? It's possible that I am. Good. Okay, so what I think we'll do next week is see what else, I think we ought to try to summarize something about what we learned today in terms of sibling rivalry and its consequences. I'm going to try to do it, maybe you guys will do it too. And then I think we'll move on to Jacob and Esau, which is also a very, very rich story filled with the family drama. So I'll see you next week. Shabbat Shalom. I stepped on the wire.
That shouldn't have made.
Oh, seriously?
I think maybe that's, I'll look at it. How do you spell Sat's name?
Who's K-A-S-S?
Okay, that's why I couldn't get it. No, not Cass. Sat.
Who's Sachs? You mean Jonathan Sachs?
The first one. P-S-V-A-T. You want to
Oh,
say
Tzvat. Oh, T-S-V.
T-S-V-A-T. I thought you said, got it.
You gonna go look for the article?
Yeah, it's an anti-Deuteronomist. That's the only one I've mentioned all this time. The whole year on
Absolutely, it's a key.
Deuteronomic histories.
And Cass says at one point, we all assume the truth of it, we act that way, we teach our children this way, we assume that the universe works this way. You gonna try to work your way through?
A little bit.
Oh, good. It's dense, but we'll talk about it.
Two quick things that I won't keep you right.
That's okay?
An alternate reading of this. This is not Eve being prideful. This refers back to God's curse. So she brought forth a man as God said I would. So in pain, she brought forth a man in pain and in misery, in labor, as God said she would.
Yes.
So she's not saying I did it, I'm as great as God because I created life. She's just saying I went through pain, I went through childbirth. I brought forth a child, I brought forth a man in the way that I was cursed to. That's just